Hello and welcome to Home Media Minefield Presents Let's See What's Out There Live, an entertainment live stream and podcast focused on movies, TV shows, and related media. My name's Keith Isles. I am an independent filmmaker, content creator, and a lifelong fan of films and television, but also a lifelong fan of James Bond and all things associated with. So for today's podcast, or for today's live stream, we are going to be looking at the Timothy Dalton era of James Bond films, specifically The Living Daylights from 1987 and License to Kill from 1989. And obviously there are going to be, of course, spoilers involved around these films, but we're also going to talk about other Bonds and Daniel Craig, etc. But I promise that we will not be doing spoilers for the latest Daniel Craig film, No Time to Die, which is currently showing in theaters and cinemas and is about to be released, I believe, next week on home media and streaming. So we will do our best not to include any spoilers for that film during our discussion. I am very, very pleased to be joined. This is almost like a Bond movie in itself, in so much as I have an international guests from around the world today. So first up, joining us from sunny Los Angeles, California, is Josh Spiegel from Movie Timelines, who has been on the stream before. Hey, Josh.
Howdy, how's it going today?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing all right. It's not so terribly sunny and nice in California right now. It's actually much colder than we're used to.
It's what is it, 11 a.m. out there, right?
Yes, yeah. Still morning.
You see, we had to have it that here in the UK it was 007 p.m. specifically for this stream today. So now, Josh, you have Movie Timelines. You know, I know you look at action, horror, sci-fi, superheroes. I've watched a lot of your videos. They're very entertaining. You do them on Bond. Now, James Bond is quite a hard franchise to put into a movie timeline, isn't it? At least a satisfying one.
It was one of the most challenging ones. I mean, outside of Godzilla, there really isn't a franchise that has had the sheer number of entries into it, and also as fractured of like, hey, is this part of it or is this not part of it? So yeah, it was a definite challenge.
Yeah, no, for sure. But we also have a third guest who is going to be a first-time guest on this channel. I'm really pleased because he's all the way from Melbourne, Australia. So we really are in 3 different time zones with this. I actually found his work, which partly inspired this this podcast or this live stream this evening. So joining us from A View on Bond is Andrew McNess.
Good morning, evening, afternoon.
Good morning.
Yes.
How are you?
Look, I'm well, thank you. I can hear that sort of early morning croaky voice, but I'm hoping it'll just sort of flow through and all. But look, I'm very well, and thanks for the invitation to be here.
No, that's all right. It's I will put links in the show notes for our viewers and listeners out there. But you did a very compelling. Well, you've done a few actually quite compelling video essays on James Bond, and I know you've done work on other films as well. So I was very happy with that. So I thought I'm really pleased that you were able to join us. So talking to people joining us, if you are watching this live, welcome. If it's your first time to the channel, welcome. If you've got any questions or comments for me or any of the guests here, please put them in the live chat and I will see if I can get to them and flag them up during the conversation. If not, that's absolutely fine. We have plenty to talk about here. And also, if you're finding this later as a video, you can still put comments down in the comment section below, and I do try and respond to all comments. Please do check out the other work on this channel, and consider giving this video a like, subscribing, hitting that bell icon so that you don't miss any content or whatever moving forward. So I thought I'd get that out of the way. Oh, we've already got one comment. So Paul Dulake is saying hello, chaps, and a wavy hand there.
Hello.
So hello, Paul Dulake. Thanks for getting involved. I appreciate that. Right. So before we get into the actual topic for tonight, I do want to ask sort of broader, both of you individually, where you are with James Bond, what your history's been with James Bond, and what your thoughts are on it. So Andrew, you're new to the channel. Let's start with you. Where did it all begin for you?
I think it began via the TV. I recall, I think Thunderball was the first Bond film that I saw. I certainly remember sharks in the pool, all of that stuff. And I think it was a summer of, where the local broadcaster was showing a range of Bond films. And I think the other one was The Man with the Golden Gun, maybe Live and Let Die as well. And I was really very hooked on it from there. And I mean, for me, I certainly, the first Bond films that I was seeing at the cinema were the 1980s films, such as View to a Kill, and of course these two that we're talking about tonight. But having said that, when I sort of first started writing about Bond and really, I guess, thinking about Bond was probably when GoldenEye came out, and there was this renewed interest in James Bond. And I can recall, Pierce Brosnan at the press conference saying, that this Bond was going to peel back the layers somewhat. And I know that I had, just watched or rewatched the two Timothy Dalton films, and I was thinking, well, I actually thought those films peeled back the layers in their own way. And so I actually found that when the new wave of films came out, I was in a way more interested in the Timothy Dalton films then than I was at the time. And I think at the time, I was a little bit cool on the Dalton films because they weren't really Roger Moore. And I mean, we can talk further regarding all of that, but yeah. But no, I mean, I'm always interested how Bond reinvents himself.
Yep.
And have at times, I mean, I think, as many do, when we talk about the success of Daniel Craig, there's also that sense of going, wait a second, there was this guy a little bit earlier on who was pulling some of this stuff together. So
which we'll absolutely come to. So I'll just stop you there before we go any further.
That's right.
Before I ask you the same question, Josh, just we've got Tom Wade has said good morning, and he's also put or afternoon. So wherever we are,
or evening,
or evening, yes, here. But that's very cool. So yeah, Josh, same for you. I mean, I know you've gone to great lengths to do these movie timelines, but what's your history with Bond been like?
Well, what's crazy is I think pretty much my whole Bond experience was pretty tangential. Like when I was younger, it was kind of off to the side. And my biggest Bond exposure, and it's one of the kind of most vivid memories I have, is when I was in college, I got mono, and everyone always talks about getting mono, and I always thought it was sort of a joke, but mono is no joke. My throat was closed up, and I couldn't eat solid foods. It was terrible. And I spent a week out of commission. And I went to my grandmother lived close to my college, and I actually went and I stayed with her, and I just like crashed out in their spare room in their bed for like a week. And as it turned out, one of the networks that was on there had a James Bond marathon.
Right.
So that's what I did with my sick week, was watch every single James Bond movie up until that point, which included the Daltons. And that was actually my first experience with the Dalton movies. But I watched them from the beginning all the way up until I don't even remember what film was current at that time, but it was all the Connerys, all the Moores, and the Dalton ones. I don't think that might have been pre-Brosnan. I'm not quite sure, but it was kind of an interesting experience. And by that point, one of my favorite movies ever was Flash Gordon. So when you had Prince Baron as James Bond, I was so excited. Plus, I had seen The Rocketeer, and I'm like, oh my god, Timothy Dalton, what a perfect James Bond, what a perfect guy. So and then the movies.
Cool. Okay, well that's very cool. The important thing is, did it make you feel better, Josh?
Well, yeah, in a way. I mean, like any escape that I had at that particular point in time was a good thing. It was a good thing to have.
Fabulous. Okay. More comments here. So Ryan Holloway has put, "Not sipping on a martini there, are you, Keith?" No, I have to say, in this 007 mug is just black coffee at the moment. Otherwise, this could really go off the rails. And also one of my good friends, Tony Kiernan, has said, "Evening, gents." Now, I know I need to definitely be up on my Bond knowledge then, because Tony is a mega Bond fan that I've known for years. So thank you for joining the stream comments, Tony. Yeah, I mean, for myself, the reason Dalton's quite important is because The Living Daylights was actually the first Bond film that I saw in the cinema. Before that, I'd seen them, either on television or home video up to that point. So this was the first one where I got the proper theatrical big screen experience. And I remember a couple of years later when License to Kill came out, where I grew up, they had some sort of charity screening of it where we got to sort of dress up in tuxedos. And I remember I took my first ever girlfriend to a screening of License to Kill. So there's some special memories of Dalton's Bond. But part of the reason I wanted to set this whole podcast up, obviously Bond's always in the zeitgeist, but never more than it is now, with the No Time to Die being at the cinema and coming out on home media, etc. But one of the things I said right from when I went to see Casino Royale, which obviously I still consider one of the all-time great Bond movies, but I really liked Daniel Craig and I really liked his portrayal as Bond. But I've always said that in terms of characterization and the portrayal of Bond, he hasn't he's had obviously new material to work with, and we've had a sort of origin story with Casino Royale, and there's been slightly different things to do. He's had to deal with being in love with Vesper and later Madeline and whatever. But in terms of characterization, there's nothing that he hadn't done that Timothy Dalton didn't do 19 years earlier with the character. The only difference being that the world, I think, wasn't ready for it at that stage, because we'd just come off this long tenure of Roger Moore playing Bond for the past 12 years and 7 movies. So I always feel that. So I just wondered, what I know you, Andrew, for sure have views on this, but I just wondered what are your kind of thoughts on that as a sort of jumping off point for this?
Well, I think for me, one of the things I guess I've always wondered, we talk about similarities between Dalton and Craig in the overall characterization of James Bond. I think that one of the things that took me a while to get my head around was why, in a way, it seems Craig has had greater audience appeal than Dalton did, and I mean maybe it has something to do with the fact that they were bringing out one film every 2 years, and people were perhaps getting a little bit sick of James Bond. But I think equally, I think there's something about Dalton's characterization where he seems a very jaded, sort of burnt out James Bond, and whereas I think even Craig seems comfortable. Craig's Bond seems comfortable within himself, even though he broods and he seethes and he gets angry and all. I think there's something about Dalton who he just seems both sort of repulsed by the whole spy game, even though I think he on some level needs it to feel alive. And so, yeah, I mean, that's sort of my overarching feeling when it comes to sort of making comparisons between Craig and Dalton. There's something in Dalton where he's just not comfortable in his sphere. Dalton's Bond, that is. Yeah.
What about you? Well, actually, before that, Josh, Ryan Holloway has put a comment up here. For me, Dalton was the first Bond to make me understand the character a little more, much more to his Bond than ever before. So, and by the way, Kitty Moo Moo says hello.
It's just call her Sable.
Sable. I know. I remember from before. Yeah, Sable. Anyway, sorry, Josh. Yeah, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, when you're talking about James Bond, you have to realize you're dealing with a character that's got an immense amount of history, not just from the movies, but he's in books, he's in comics, he's in everything, and you've got this entire like history of a human being to kind of deal with, and so few of the film actually kind of deal with that character and his history and his character quirks. And it's kind of odd because sometimes you just get James Bond as sort of a cipher character that's just going through these events, and it could kind of be anybody. I will admit I kind of feel that way about some of the Daniel Craig movies, and that I just feel as if that could be, you could give that character a different name and the movie still makes perfect sense. To me, it's best when you have if you were to change the name of the character and you watched the movie, if you would still be like, yeah, that seems like James Bond. Those are the ones that really stand out to me. Casino Royale really felt like that to me because it felt like a very Bondian kind of a character because he had those unique quirks. Whether it was the drinking habits or the just jerkiness. And I think that Dalton had some of that character depth, and they did sort of go into his backstory a little bit. I guess I would have liked to have seen a little bit more from it. My relationship with the Dalton movies is a little fractured, I guess is the best way to say it, because I want to like them more than I do.
Yes. Okay, fair enough. Actually, a good point to something I wanted to get to here is Tony's put the jump from Moore to Dalton as a reboot was maybe too much for the audience. And I think that's an interesting point because I always think every time they change the Bonds up until Daniel Craig, which was an official reboot, but I think of them as soft reboots actually, because, otherwise, as Josh gets tied up with his movie timelines thing, it doesn't make sense with the character's age and the fact that they look different and all of this sort of stuff. And so I always think of them as a soft reboot. But what I think is interesting is reboot is a term that, in terms of movies and television, reboot has been kind of battered around as a term in the last sort of 20 years or so. But I think back in the late 80s when these films came out, unless I'm wrong, the term reboot for something like a movie wasn't even in the vernacular
Not really.
if you like. And I think again, maybe Dalton and those films were slightly ahead of their time. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that when you take a look at the movies, I know when I did the breakdown of it, to me, the Dalton one is the first one that sort of makes sense as quite possibly being in a different universe. Because I feel as if the flow from Connery to Lazenby, and then back to Connery made sense as being like one continuity. But I even felt as if having it be the same character in through Roger Moore still made a lot of sense, especially because they did the continuity bits with Tracy Bond and everything like that, where pulling him in, having to go visit the grave, and like his little back and forth with Blofeld. There was all that kind of stuff where it was, I felt like one solid continuity. But then you get to Dalton, and all of a sudden, he's much younger, which isn't too distracting. But then you have Moneypenny walk in, and it's supposed to be the same lady, and she's now like 20 years younger. And that's, to me, it was the first sort of indication that, like, okay, things are different here. It's now a new guy, this is a new universe. And I feel like it was the first one to me that did it. It still had that little chunk of continuity in there, but not as much as prior.
Yeah. I mean, even the Daniel Craig movies, arguably, one could say it's kind of a soft reboot in the fact that they retained Judi Dench as M, for that bit of familiarity, if you like. But you're right. Apart from the sort of Lazenby blip, Dalton was actually the first time that Bond got younger, because lots of people think that Roger Moore was younger because obviously he looked very different to Connery and played the role very different, but he was actually slightly older than Connery. So the character didn't actually get younger in the films until that point, right? So
yeah. And one of the crazy things that I pointed out in my video was that when they did Never Say Never Again, and they brought back Sean Connery, and he was playing like old, tired James Bond. It was like, oh, he should be retired. But yet Connery was younger than Moore was, and Moore was supposed to be like, I'm James Bond in my prime, and it's just, it was just an odd scenario.
Yeah, well, Never Say Never Again don't count. But I agree. I used to like the fact that it dealt with an older Bond, even though essentially it was a remake of Thunderball. So just having a quick look at the comments. I want to hear from you, Andrew, just real quick. So Paul Dulake's put, Dalton, although tough, has the suave nature that Bond is, lost on Craig's thuggish portrayal. Interesting, yes. But sorry, what were you going to say, Andrew?
Oh gosh, now what was I?
Sorry.
And well, no, it was actually just regarding sort of that movement from Moore to Dalton, because I think when I look at the three films that Moore did with John Glenn, especially View to a Kill, I sort of think back to that scene at Fisherman's Wharf where Chuck Lee is briefing Bond, and there's a number of comments that Moore makes, like, sounds like Zoran's kind of man. These sorts of dry, sardonic lines and sort of that slightly, again, fed up quality that I think Dalton has. I think it's starting to see that a little in Moore's portrayal. In his last few movies, even though he, of course, brought that levity to proceedings as well, there was a slightly, darker element coming through. And I sometimes think that if we had gone from View to a Kill to License to Kill, thinking again of that, thinking of the scene in A View to a Kill where Zoran shoots his workforce, basically, to have gone from View to a Kill to License to Kill, I think would have been a semi-segue of sorts, just that the films were, I think, getting more violent and all. So I think where the trickiest or where the biggest jump for me occurs in the 80s films is when you go from Living Daylights, which is this very lush romantic film, to License to Kill, which is this very dark piece. And I always feel that with the Dalton, with the 2 films he did, of course, we can always say that he could have done with a third one, but I almost feel that he needed a film between Living Daylights and License to Kill, because I feel as though the greatest jump within the 80s was sort of sitting in a theatre watching License to Kill, going, gosh, this is much more violent than the Living Daylights was, and it's far more cynical, and all. So just thinking of that movement from film to film, it always felt a very sharp jump, I think, from Daylights to License to Kill.
Okay, no, I think that's an interesting observation. Absolutely. Just another. Sorry, I want to obviously include some of these comments as well. So Sable has said Dalton tends to be rather like a person with untreated, undiagnosed PTSD. Basically, is showing the cracks provided by the actions of the previous Bonds, which I like that.
Interesting.
I did put together some slides as well, so being a bit probably a bit over the top with this, but one of the things I wanted to say about, or I've always said about Dalton, because we talk about all the different Bonds and sort of what they bring and what's special about each one, and there's a quote there about the physical appearance of Bond from a Fleming novel. I think it was From Russia with Love that he first used this, and to be honest, with apart from the the scar on the cheek, which Bond is supposed to have in the books, but the actual description otherwise, being sort of tall and slim, with the blue-gray eyes and all of that sort of thing, it was the sort of Hoagie Carmichael that Fleming had in mind when he was doing it, and obviously that illustration was from one of the early newspaper adaptations. But I think arguably one could say that Dalton, the fact that he smoked as well, and he wore a Rolex, all of these kind of things really sort of harken back to the description of Bond in the novels. What do you think?
Well, I know this is opening up a slight can of worms, but put me on the train of I don't give a damn what Bond looks like. I don't care. You could make him whatever race you want. I don't care. You could make him a woman. I don't care. I care what the character acts like. I care about the personality of it. And if we're talking about how the character acts and feels, that to me is more James Bond, how he responds to situations, how he handles things. And James Bond in the books is a very particular type of character. And he's kind of a dick. And he's reckless. He takes chances, but he's extremely skilled. So those chances often pay off. But they get him into trouble, and he's very cocky. He's very jerky. The Sean Connery Bond, I think, best emphasized that, which is why he comes off as the most rapey, apparently, oddly enough, because he is. And James Bond, when you read the books, James Bond was kind of rapey, like is just how his character was. And I think that even toning that down and having him just be kind of like a braggart and like a little bit of a lout, but a smooth, sophisticated lout, like Timothy Dalton in The Rocketeer, is the perfect encapsulation of that character, which is why I would have loved to have seen that version of Dalton be Bond. And we got some of it. But we didn't get all of it. He does obviously look like that guy in that picture. But I don't know. For me, I know this is sort of off topic, but I'm never that hung up on a character having to look exactly, because then you got Daniel Craig, who's blonde, obviously doesn't look like that guy. You've got Sean Connery, who's not even English. And so how is that not considered a blasphemy of the character rather than just having him look different?
Yeah, and of course Dalton was Welsh. We didn't go there, but yeah, no. The reason I've called it the Dalton debate is this is exactly what I want. Is if we're all agreeing on absolutely everything, then we haven't got much of a conversation going. So that's good. What about you, Andrew? Do you have a viewpoint on this?
Well, look, I would love to bring in something counter, but I'm actually very similar. I mean, when Daniel Craig was cast, I thought, well, this is great. This is this is interesting. This is different. He does look different to any previous Bond actor. So again, I think it's more about what sort of essence I guess each actor brings to the role rather than how they look. I mean, you always expect that Bond will be handsome. You expect that he'll be able to wear a tux comfortably and all. But what version of handsome or cool and composed that is, it's a fairly open book to me.
Yeah. No, that's
but I certainly will try and find something to argue about. So yeah, we'll bring something in there.
That's good. Well, I mean, Ryan Holloway's put another comment here, which I think is key as well. Is the Bourne movies changed everything for Bond. The franchise needed to compete with it, and the next picture here has got, Bond in '89 and Bond in 2008, and it's that old thing again that if you look at the Roger Moore films, he barely broke a sweat, got a hair out of place, and all of this sort of thing. And you get to Dalton, who's bloodied and bleeding, and his clothes get a mess and all of that sort of thing. And again, later that's reflected in the Craig films as well. So,
and
yeah.
I'll agree with that wholeheartedly about the Bourne movies changing it, but I will also add that the other thing that drastically changed the Bond franchise was Austin Powers, because you now had this very, very popular parody, and it was kind of saying, hey, look at all this stuff that these guys are known for. Isn't this silly? So I think that the new Bond movies have tried to go so far away from that because they don't want to be associated with the comedic things that Austin Powers was making fun of. So they tried to go as far as they could into the other direction. And to me, drained out a lot of the things that made James Bond, and instead just became like the Bourne movies or just any other action movie.
Sure. No, absolutely. Well, that kind of I think is a good sort of segue to bring us in then to more specifically talking about the Living Daylights. And I've got a couple of pictures there. There's a picture of Pierce Brosnan, at his audition, or his screen test, should I say, not audition, screen test for Bond. And then as we kind of know that in many respects, for some years, Timothy Dalton had been a kind of on the radar of the Cubby Broccoli and whatever, as a possible Bond, right back to when they were in talks about Her Majesty's Secret Service, at which point Dalton was still in his 20s and thought, he was far too young to play the role at that point, which I agree with. But of course, Brosnan, who would go on to play Bond later, was obviously all set to go on the Living Daylights. And because of his whole, I know everybody knows this story, but because of the whole Remington Steele contract debacle, Dalton sort of stepped in at the 11th hour somewhat, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And Tony made a comment here saying, agreed with me on the reboot comment. The introduction to Dalton is one of the best, though, and I totally agree with this. I mean, what an absolute cool introduction to the character and the scene in Gibraltar, on the and again with him doing some of his own stunts, as you could see there with on the top of the Land Rover and whatever. But
that's a lovely sort of camera movement in when he's first revealed and all. It's a great introduction, I would agree.
I tell you what, the Bond movies have always done a good job of because the introduction of Brosnan as Bond was also was done really well. The introduction of Craig as Bond, that's something they always seem to nail really well. Of like, hey, we've got a new Bond, and we're going to introduce them in a pretty dramatic fashion. Even Lazenby got that fun introduction in the beginning. The only one that really didn't get an exciting like, here's the new character is Roger Moore. But yeah, Dalton's is great. It's such a great scene.
Yeah. Well, Roger Moore got the sheer magnetism, didn't he? Tony's also said The Living Daylights was perfect for Dalton's first movie, as you're back to a true spy film, East versus West, just what we needed after A View to a Kill. And yes, I would certainly agree with that as well. Also, you touched on this earlier. I think Josh, you touched on it. The fact that we had him surrounded by some familiar faces. With Robert Brown's M, who had been in a few films prior. Taken over from Bernard Lee, and Desmond Llewellyn as Q. But yeah, we did get a new Moneypenny. I want to say Caroline Bliss. Have I got that correct?
I think so.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry, I'm just checking that now. I should have checked this before time. Yes, Caroline Bliss. I did get that right. So we did get the new Moneypenny there.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Moneypenny, that she perhaps was needing some stronger scenes. I mean, I think with The Living Daylights, they almost seem to be sort of bringing her in as though she was the same Moneypenny in a sense. They were trying to do it in a fairly non-ostentatious way, but she sort of tends to glide in and glide out. Whereas I think the Moneypenny in Brosnan's, and I can't recall the actress in the Brosnan films, but I think she was given some stronger scenes and much more sparring, I think.
That was Samantha Bond.
Samantha Bond. Gosh.
There you go. How could you forget that?
How could that sling out of the mind? Yeah.
Yeah, took over in that. But no, I agree. They didn't give in the two Dalton films, they didn't give Moneypenny a lot to do, did they? It's fair to say. So yeah.
I mean, they probably gave her as much as she had historically. I think the Brosnan Moneypenny was the first one that really had kind of a juicier part of the movies, because even like in the Moore ones, I feel as if, and even in the Connery ones, Moneypenny was just the pretty lady in the office that he would share a couple of scenes with and have some fun banter. So yeah, I feel as if that character. I feel like the only time I feel like the character got a chunk of the storyline. I mean, the was one of the best part of the Craig ones was actually having Moneypenny be a little bit more involved in things, which was kind of nice.
Yeah. No, she got some backstory as well, which was and a first name and a backstory. Always good. What did we think as well? Something that was a bit of a departure on The Living Daylights was the fact that Bond for Bond was fairly monogamous in that film. Okay, there's the implied woman on the yacht at the beginning in the credit sequence, but throughout the main story, it's just the one Bond girl. And again, that was a huge difference between a film beforehand, a submarine disguised as an iceberg, and a model basically 30 years younger than Roger Moore, kind of making out with him before the beginning credits. You know what I mean? It was a big change, and Yeah. Any thoughts on that, or any thoughts on Mariam Darbo as a Bond girl?
Well, I mean, let's face it. If it comes down to you and Mariam Diabo, it's like, yeah, I'll stick with monogamy for a while. Thank you. It's just beautiful. It's like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
I think it. Sorry, I think it sort of takes the film sort of back to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, even though when he was up in Piz Gloria, he was. I think he was, having multiple partners there, but there was one Bond girl, or and it was a meaningful, excuse me, relationship, and similarly in The Living Daylights, his relationship with Kara feels genuine, even though there is some level of deceit going on, that he's, Bond's playing a role with her, but there is some genuine feeling there. But that question of, I guess, if Bond's a one girl man, does he sort of lose some of his vitality, and certainly there was a lot of critical conjecture which suggested that many people just weren't really happy with that state of affairs, even though it was sort of bringing Bond more up to date. And I think that's always been one of the challenges for the Bond makers, how to sort of keep Bond, but also bring him up to date, so that he isn't the dinosaur character that that Judi Dench's M chastised him as being.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, no, indeed. In fact, probably quite controversial, but Paul Dulake's asking, he said, serious question here. Do we think Bond is a super seducer that women can't resist, or a borderline sex offender?
Well, I think if we're talking about Connery's Bond, we know the answer to that is you can just take borderline right out of that question, because the Connery Bond is absolutely a sex pest. I mean, that dude is very, very rapey. But I think like the later Bonds, I think when you got into more and you got to Dalton and Brosnan and even like Craig, I think they really toned that back, and I think that they did a much better job of like writing it into the script that the women like approached them a little bit more, or like it was just a more consensual thing. Whereas, you watch the Bond ones and he's like essentially forcing like a massage therapist to have sex with him in order to not get in trouble. It's just like, what? So
yeah.
Yes, no, absolutely. In fact, Tony says here, I don't think Dalton had the charm or charisma to have played the womanizer, so the script writers probably did the right things.
I so heartily disagree with that. I don't think I've disagreed with a comment more in my life.
Okay.
Man,
that's good.
Go watch The Rocketeer and tell me that there's not charm and charisma dripping off that man. Go watch him as Prince Baron of the ice planet of Flash Gordon and tell me that that's
Clark Gable. Basically, it was his Clark Gable, wasn't it?
Yeah. That dude is super charismatic. I think the fact that he doesn't come off as charming or charismatic as Bond, I think is a little bit more indicator of the direction and the script more than anything else, because he can do it.
Yeah. Well, I think as well with The Living Daylights, I think when you think about it, that script was originally kind of tooled for Brosnan, right? And sort of retooled for Dalton, and then obviously License to Kill, which we will come to, was full Dalton. Just saying hello to people who are saying hello in the chat. Heather Davis is saying hello all. Hello, Heather.
Hello.
Welcome to Home Media Minefield's live stream, and thank you for the comment. I'm just making, there are lots of comments coming through, so I'm just making sure that I'm not missing anyone.
Just while the comments are coming through, I certainly think true. You can see in a way how Dalton was quite perhaps daring in a way, because I think you do see in films such as Flash Gordon and Rocketeer that he had the charm in spades. I mean, his performance in The Rocketeer, I think, really shows you how he could have played Bond in a completely different way and would have been really successful at it, and I think would have had a much larger audience. But I think he definitely wanted to do something different with his version of Bond. And wanted to give it something more serious, more human, in a way. And again, I just think it was quite a daring portrayal, and maybe it did align with what the filmmakers were wishing to do. But I think he was still putting himself out there.
Okay. No, I think these are all fair comments, and that's as I said, this is why we have debate. There is no right or wrong answer. Everybody's
yes. All opinions are welcome.
Exactly. Well, they are on this channel. I'm being diplomatic here, but okay. So on that note, so sort of moving forward there. Oh, by the way, one last before we get onto this, one last thing I did want to say about Living Daylights as well. Is, of course, this was the last time that John Barry actually scored a Bond film. Obviously, he went on to score lots more films after this and is sadly no longer with us. But one of the things I think Living Daylights has definitely got going for it is a absolutely fantastic score. I thought the John Barry score in this one was superb. What about you guys? Any thoughts on the music? Because I always think the music of Bond is quite an important aspect.
I would I'd love to set out the challenge to anyone who has the time to do it, but I would love to see License to Kill rescored with John Barry's score from the Specialist, which was sort of set in a similar region and all. Yeah, I watched that film really for the score, and sort of looked at certain tracks and thought, yeah, let's put that in the scene with Sanchez, the scene in the casinos. It's got a great Bondian feel to it, that score, and if anyone would ever like to just recompose License to Kill, go for it. I mean, I don't mind Michael Kamen's score, but there's a certain menace and I think lushness in John Barry's scores that's pretty hard to replicate.
No, agreed. Josh, have you got any thoughts on that?
Not so much the score, but those opening theme songs. I mean, it's like somebody had mentioned up in the chat a little earlier. Oh, there we go. About having two great theme songs, yeah, I mean, you got like a tune by Gladys Knight, and then you've got the Living Daylights by Aha doing their best Duran Duran impression that they can possibly do in that song, and they're both great tunes. I mean, the one thing you can always count on Bond movies for are great theme songs. It's funny because I don't think that outside of the, of course, main theme song. Bond scores never really stuck that much with me as being
really?
Yeah, I don't know, but I will admit that scores are not, they've never been a big passion of mine, so I'm probably not the person to ask for an opinion on that in general, but if you got a cool pop theme song, I'm down.
Cool. Okay, well, actually scores is quite a good thing to sort of lead us into this then. So because obviously in 1989 we get License to Kill, which was definitely written and tooled for Dalton's strengths as Bond. But it was interesting to see what had happened in the couple of years prior to that with the whole blockbuster action movie marketplace. And interestingly, the reason I say it's the music's sort of key is because Michael Kamen, who scored License to Kill, also scored these other two movies that had come out before it, Die Hard and Lethal Weapon. And those were the kind of action movies that were quite vogue at that point and were doing well at the box office. And I almost wonder whether License to Kill, in some respects, was a bit of a reaction to that, and a bit of a reaction to the success of those movies. And the Bond franchise is always moving to try and evolving to try and compete with trends and whatever out there, just like they did with Moonraker off the back of the whole Star Wars thing. I'm just wondering, we had films like Lethal Weapon and Die Hard in the cinemas, and on TV, Miami Vice had just come to the end of a really successful run on network television. I don't know. Am I crazy, or do you think there's a point here?
I will admit, I almost wish that they had taken a little bit more of the lead of those movies, because I think the reason why Lethal Weapon and Die Hard were so popular, especially Die Hard, was because of the every guy aspect of them. And even Lethal Weapon, because you have Riggs, who was kind of just like a crazy, just random dude, and of course Die Hard was supposed to be just a guy, and instead you've got License to Kill, and you've got James Bond, who's this sort of untouchable super spy, who's elite and has all these fancy things and all the best of everything. And I almost wish that they had really focused more on the real world aspects and kind of everymanish character that you can make it. I mean, as much as you can make James Bond an everyman, but I mean, that's the challenge of the movie. And I almost wish that they had done that a little bit more, because they gave Felix a little bit more of that, hey, I'm just a regular dude in this world in License to Kill. And I almost wish they kind of did that a little bit more with Bond.
Okay. Andrew, any thoughts on that?
I'm sort of caught in that whole thing of whether at times the Bond films just need to ride out certain trends. I mean, I certainly know that, when I first started seeing some scenes from License to Kill with the Michael Kamen score, it was jarring for a little, because I felt as though I was in a Lethal Weapon film. and I certainly recall at the time, being aware that Bond had lost some of his box office luster. The films were still making money; they were still making tidy profits and all, but they weren't the monster hits of the 1960s and the mid to late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure for the Bond producers, there's that desire to keep the grosses to the level that they once were.
Mm-hmm.
But equally, I just sometimes think, do you need to retain some sort of essential Bondian essence? Hope that doesn't sound too pretentious. And just sort of ride out those waves where you have slightly lesser box office because you're not quite as much of the times as you once were. Look, I mean, this is an issue that I'm sure the producers have debated time and time again. What direction do we take it and all? So to sort of bring that back to License to Kill, look, I was still happy that we had a lot of scenes of Bond in casinos or Bond in lavish locations, even though I think there were fewer of those in License to Kill, but it still retained some of that Bond glamour.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I think I certainly remember at the end of License to Kill, when he's bloodied and beaten and his suit is ripped and all, that was quite a confronting image at the time. it was like some sort of Bondian sacrilege, to see that. That was fantastic. So, I mean, maybe they could have had more of that in License to Kill. But I still like the Bond with every hair in place and all. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think seem to remember that actually made the British headlines over here with a byline, "Bloody Bond," and a picture of him all messed up. Because again, it wasn't what the audience were used to seeing in a Bond film. Sable's also said that Die Hard, incidentally, is also based on a book from the 50s or 60s. And Tony has said also the real life Narcos influence, Pablo Escobar, has to be mentioned. And I think that's very true. If you look at the Robert Davi character, in this film, there's definitely some sort of influence going on there as well, isn't there? The other thing I've always thought about this, and again, maybe I'm stretching slightly here, but with things following trends, as we put it, even down to guns, and obviously Bond is of course famous for having the Walther PPK, which of course he has in this film as well, but at the beginning of the film, he has the Beretta 9mm, which is the gun that John McClane has in Die Hard and Riggs uses in Lethal Weapon. And I always also thought this about Live and Let Die, where Roger Moore is using the 44 Magnum, and that was sort of after the Dirty Harry films and Magnum Force and stuff like that. And I just wonder if even that sort of thing comes into it. What do you think? Am I crazy?
I'm going to say probably the least American thing that I've ever said on any channel. I sadly don't know anything about guns. I think the only reason why I know what a Walther PPK is because of James Bond. Yeah. I don't know the name of any other gun at all. So I in movies, whenever they do stuff like that, I'm again not necessarily the audience for noticing stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I know when he uses the Walther PPK because that's the one I would always use when I was playing GoldenEye on my Nintendo 64.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
People will often, I think, when people find out that I'm interested in James Bond, they'll make reference to cars, they'll make reference to guns. And I have to say, I'm terribly sorry. I have next to no knowledge of guns or cars and all. And, that's, well, what sort of Bond fan are you? I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, no, I get it. I get it. So, of course, the other thing with this film, in terms of its marketing, is, some say that it was a poorly marketed film, and this is why it didn't do as well. And the poster designs weren't as cool as some of the previous Bond movies, etc. But of course, it did go through a fairly last-minute title change, right? Because it was originally license revoked, and they decided apparently not enough people knew what revoked meant, and changed it to License to Kill, which also caused problems because, of course, license is spelt different depending on what part of the world you're in. So
I endorse that change because I think license revoked does not really sound like that exciting of an action spy thriller. I don't know, License to Kill it definitely has a little bit more of an impact. I mean, I think it's a minor distinction, but License to Kill, it's a little bit more of a dynamic title than License Revoked. License Revoked makes me think about James Bond failing his eye test as he gets a little older and can't quite parallel park the way he used to. So there you go.
I like it. We're going back to Never Say Never Again, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean,
you, Andrew, how was it marketed out in Australia?
Look, there was one other poster that I think that they were showing at the time, which had a blue tinge, and it again, sort of with Bond running gun in hand, and it's saying James Bond is out on his own and out for revenge. I don't know. I mean, people have talked about the marketing letting the film down. I think in watching the film, I mean, I'm struck by the violence in the film, even though by today's standards it might be, fairly light on. But one of the things that strikes me about License to Kill, and I wonder whether this had some impact on its box office takings as well, is that its second half is actually quite talky. The first half is full of action, and then the final truck chase, of course, is a fantastic action scene. But the second half of the film is mostly talking heads, and I sometimes wonder whether that had some impact on the film's overall box office takings, even though I think the second half, at least for me, I think is very, very well done. And, people who say that John Glenn's just an action director, I think really need to look at that second half, because I think it's the scenes, especially between Bond and Sanchez, but there's also some scenes between Bond and Pam Bouvier that are really strong. And I think that whole undercurrent of how Bond manipulates Sanchez is very well done. So much so that I come out of the film sort of feeling sorry for Sanchez, even though he is, we see him being so sort of unbearably cruel. There's that level of feeling sympathy for the man who is being manipulated.
I never feel bad for one of the Fratelli brothers. I'd never feel bad for one of the Fratelli brothers.
Well, that's right. It is testing things a bit, isn't it? Yeah. But I mean, I think that Sanchez too is interesting. I find with the Dalton character, with the Dalton films, the most charming characters are the villains. And I think Sanchez has so many good quips in License to Kill. And in a way, he's this dark mirror of Bond. Even though I think Bond in License to Kill is a fairly dark reptilian character himself. And so, sometimes when I rewatch License to Kill, I do something that I'm surprised that I do, that I just go to the second half when they arrive in Isthmus City, and I watch those talking head scenes, because I just think that it's really, really well done. John Glenn has said, I think in his autobiography, that he's fascinated by the balance between hero and villain, and I think that really comes through in License to Kill. Also View to a Kill, because I think there's a Bond film where the villain is really sort of getting under Bond's skin. And of course, Living Daylights has that interesting dynamic between Bond and the villains, because those villains are in a way sort of silly figures almost, and matching them up against the no nonsense Dalton is quite an interesting, I think, hero villain dynamic. So thinking about why License to Kill perhaps didn't do as well as previous Bond films, I think, I wonder whether that second half, such a talky second half, might have lost some people anyway.
Yeah. Well, with the Bond movies too, you have to consider, and I guess this is with any franchise, that when you have a character that's in a series of movies for so long, and at this point he had been in movies for 25, close to 30 years, then you have to keep adding things into it. And I feel as if at this particular point in the franchise, instead of adding to things, they were subtracting things, which is, again, what I feel like they're doing right now with the Daniel Craig movies. They're subtracting things and they're pulling them away. So they're stripping it down. And to me, that means if you're going to strip down all of the other stuff of the story, like you're going to take away some of the gadgety things, you're going to take away the elaborate villains and these elaborate henchmen, and now you've just got this kind of rather straightforward drug runner guy. And you've got these stories that are a little bit more base level. Then what are you adding? And to me, if they would have added more, like, okay, well, we're going to get more into James Bond as a human being and a character, then that is adding something. And I think part of why it didn't do so well is because it didn't give enough of that. They started to kind of dip into it a little bit, but then they never really followed through with it, because, as you're saying, in the second half, which gets very talky, but it's mainly about the storyline of the movie, which, again, doesn't really feel like something you haven't seen before. So I don't feel as if they really, the Dalton movies don't add much to the character, and they don't add a lot to the overall lore of the series in general. And yes, I apologize for not remembering that Sloth is also a Fratelli.
Now, I know what you mean. I mean, I think, as we sort of said, in terms of performance, Timothy did what essentially Daniel has done, many years later. But you're right, in terms of the material, he wasn't really given the opportunity with the stories to explore that sort of backstory and character and things like that than he had. Than Daniel Craig was fortunate enough to have with his arc of movies. And I think you're right, as you said earlier, that he was just kind of, this was, in terms of backstory, this was just using the previous Bond movies. But to your point, Andrew, about the villains as well, I think when you look at the Dalton, well, not just the Dalton films, when you look at the Bond films that were directed by John Glenn, so the ones going back to For Your Eyes Only, essentially, at that point they really did sort of tone down the villains to make them, less over the top, if you like, than the likes of Hugo Drax or Blofeld or whatever, and none more so than in this film, I think. And of course, I've got a picture up there. We get a very young, very early in his career, Benicio del Toro in the film as well, which is always is always great to see as the henchman.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Talking about backstory and how backstory can reveal new elements to a character and all, and I certainly think that's true. I tend to feel, though, with Bond, what can reveal more about his character is how he responds to other characters in whatever adventure he's in. I think the way he responds to certain villains. And I felt we saw this quite a bit during the 80s, how he responded to Max Zorin, how he responded to Franz Sanchez. Bond himself can be a cruel character, but you can see that there are, in a way, thankfully, limits to Bond's cruelty, that he in turn can be repulsed by the cruelty of others. And so I feel that actually there was quite a bit of character insight within the Dalton films, even though they weren't, there was no sort of bringing up backstory. There was no, there was no brother who,
Thank God.
turned into bro. Yes, that's right.
It really does become Austin Powers at that point, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Yes, yes. But I think even in that scene with Pam Bouvier, where she says to him that there is more to this than your personal vendetta. There's more in this situation with Sanchez than merely your personal vendetta. I feel as though in that moment, Bond comes out of a spell. There's this great close-up of Dalton. It's just like, that's true. And for the rest of the film, I think you see Dalton's body language. It's more relaxed. He's less of that sort of vacillating, short-tempered guy. Even though he still wants to get Sanchez, there's just something in his body language that changes. And I think all those little touches are really quite rich. And sort of serve you well with multiple viewings of the film too.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree. This is interesting actually, because I don't know how this was in you're both from other countries. So Ryan Holloway has said here that was Licensed to Kill the first Bond to be a 15 certificate, and that have impacted the box office? And I know that this was actually the first Bond film to get a other than a PG, to get a 15 certificate here in the UK. How was that in the US? Did it in Australia? Sorry, did it affect your territories?
I think it was. Well, it was rated M, which means recommended for anyone 15 years and above. But anyone under 15 could have walked into the movie theatre. I don't know whether it would have impacted the box office. I mean, when View to a Kill was also rated M here when it first came out. I don't know whether it would have. I mean, possibly it would pay. Maybe people would have thought, I don't want to go and see a more violent Bond film, but I mean, films like Lethal Weapon and Lethal Weapon 2 of the same summer and all that they were also rated M, and of course they had huge earnings. So I don't know.
Yeah. It was that whole sort of Joel Silver era, wasn't it, with the action movies of that time? Yeah. By the way,
right.
Josh, are you sure you're not a Bond villain? Because when you disappeared just then, you had left a high back chair with a cat on it.
Oh yes.
Yes, that is so Bond villain.
Yes, I have a very well, and plus I am talking to you from inside of an active volcano. Is the other thing. So that might be the thing that tips off a little bit more. But it's funny. I can't find what Living Daylights was. Oh no, yeah, Living Daylights was PG. So License to Kill was probably the first PG-13 that was over here as well too. But honestly, I feel as if being PG-13 instead of PG might have actually helped it here in terms of selling an action movie, because I feel like PG is a little harder to sell because everyone thinks it's a kids movie.
Okay, interesting. So looking at a bit more at this, I mean, one of the things you've mentioned a couple of times, Andrew, is the Pam Bouvier, and Dalton was very lucky in this one to get two lovely Bond girls, unlike his previous installments. But also, obviously, Felix was back, and Felix in this one played an absolute key role to this storyline. And they did something that they'd not done before, is they actually bought, for the first time, they brought an actor back that had previously played Felix. So they brought David Hedison back, who had played Felix in Live and Let Die with Roger Moore. They brought him back for this. But back to the whole sort of movie timelines, continuity stuff, Josh, this has actually caused yet another problem, because, of course, one film earlier in The Living Daylights, Felix Leiter appears in that, played by actor John Terry, who's some 20 years younger than
Yeah.
David Hedison was 2 years later. So how do we get out of that one, Josh?
No, no. Felix is the most confusing character in all of Bond, because I think this is outside of the Daniel Craig movies, and I might be wrong in this, so forgive me if I am wrong.
You're
But
not.
I believe that this is the only time that Felix was played by the same actor twice. And yes, there were several movies in between. Felix makes no sense. There's no way to reconcile Felix at all, except to say, and this might be an obscure reference, that he's one of those bounty hunters from the movie Critters. And when he sees people, he can just take on their appearance and just change his appearance whenever he wants. That's the only thing that makes any sort of sense, because Felix, man, people talk about James Bond recasting not making any sense with the timeline. Felix makes no sense because he's always different, and he's a different age. He's got different hairstyles. He's different ethnicities. Everything. It's bizarre.
Yep. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's certainly as though they've gone, oh, now we need to cast someone in the Felix Leiter role. Almost forgot that. Oh, well, this guy looks good.
Here, the director's brother is standing outside. Get him in there, Felix, real quick.
Indeed. No, indeed. The Felix Leiter thing, up until Daniel Craig, has always been a problem. But, yeah. And even with Daniel Craig, if you wanted to use the whole 007 James Bond as a code name thing, it doesn't work there either, right?
I know. I feel like every time they introduce him, it's just like he like walks in and James Bond is like, "Oh, look, it's Felix Leiter, my best friend for many, many years. Hi, Felix." And it's like, otherwise the audience is like, "Who's this? Who's this guy? Who is this now?"
Exactly. And what about the Bond women in this then? So we've got Carrie Lowell playing Pam Bouvier and Talisa Soto playing Lupe. And, you know, this is another one of those Bond movies where he kind of teams up with a female agent to hand in hand, solve it all. And I just wondered, do you guys have any sort of strong thoughts on these as Bond girls, or Bond women, as we're supposed to say now, I guess?
Certainly.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, I certainly think that Carrie Lowell gets some strong scenes. There's that great first scene in the bar, in the Barrelhead bar. She again has
the bar from what was the Patrick Swayze film?
Roadhouse.
Yes. Yeah, the bar from Roadhouse. That's what it looked like.
Is it really?
No, it wasn't.
Oh, does it? Yes. Could have fooled me, but
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
No. I mean, she does have some strong scenes. Again, that earlier, as what I referred to earlier, that scene where she and Bond have that confrontation, and she says, "There's more to this than your personal vendetta." Another strong scene. I feel as though on some level they bring in some competition between Pam and the other Bond girl, Loopy, which I probably could have done without. But having said that, it doesn't really hurt the film, I don't think. And there's some good humor to be mined from it. But I feel as though with the Pam character, they're sort of slightly caught between this sort of new Bond woman and sort of the old, in a sense, Bond woman who's sort of clinging to Bond's arm. They still haven't quite reconciled that tension in a way. So, and Loopy, I know a lot of people are sort of critical of Talisa Soto's performance. I think she's perfectly fine. She has a good sort of haunted look, I think, which sort of suits the character.
Yep. No, I agree with that. Josh, any thoughts?
Yeah, I feel when when I was rewatching these, and I rewatched for the channel, I rewatched them all in a big block.
Mhm.
The Bond girl situation in this one felt like one of the biggest missed opportunities to me in possibly the whole series, and the reason why is because I felt as if when they did the Living Daylights, the whole relationship that he formed in that movie felt like more than what Bond had previously. Like on almost every single movie, whenever he hooked up with a woman near the ending of the movie, it seemed like a fling. It seemed like we just made it through this adventure together. Let's have sex. Whereas this seemed like a genuine love story, and it seemed as if there was some sort of connection. And then to have the next movie, she's not in it, she's not mentioned, there's no nothing. And that it felt like a huge missed opportunity for me in terms of character depth and everything, and it's in terms of like a recurring storyline. But it almost invalid, like in rewatching it, it sort of invalidates that whole love story part of the other one to me a
Mhm.
little bit more, because they do play it up like this is a bigger deal. Like he has more of a connection here than normal. And then, but it just ends up being the same old for Bond, but it's not mentioned. So when I watched License to Kill, in that's not mentioned, and it's just another woman, and it's still sort of another romantic-y thing is sort of hinted at here with this character. I couldn't buy into it because I had just seen that same storyline not play out one movie previously. So in terms of like an overarching story, I felt as if it was a missed opportunity.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's fair comment as well.
I feel in a way with License to Kill, because that relationship between Bond and Sanchez is sort of so central and sort of so encompassing that in a way the film could almost do without Bond girls.
Yeah, right.
Why not?
I don't know. I mean, of course, Bond always has to, provide the expected formula, but I feel as though that's one film where they almost could have jettisoned the Bond girl. Although equally, you don't want a Bond film where the only female character is being whipped with was it a stingray's tail or something like that. So. Yeah,
Riding
maybe
crop
we
or
did
something.
need.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I mean, it's that sort of thing. Is on one hand they were kind of breaking the formula and moving away from the formula, but in another way they were completely sticking to it as well. And yeah, it was a kind of. I
Yeah.
mean, one of the things I do want us to touch on before we kind of wrap up on this conversation, because I am conscious of the time here as well, is I think each actor who's played Bond has kind of a unique relationship with Q. Yeah, particularly the ones where Desmond Llewellyn played Q, and I think in this one of the highlights for me of License to Kill is the fact that we get Q actually quite involved in the story and out in the field a bit more
Mm.
rather than just in his lab at MI6. And I've always sort of thought, whereas like Connery and Llewellyn and Bond and Q there had kind of an antagonistic relationship, and Roger Moore and then later Pierce Brosnan had a kind of fun, playful relationship with Q. I sort of feel that Dalton, it was almost like a sort of fatherly figure to Bond in a way. I don't know. Have you got any thoughts on this?
it was a little, yeah. I mean, I feel as if it's drier. And I guess my criticism of the Dalton movies in general is that they're dry movies. And yeah, a lot of that sort of kind of playful fun of the interaction with Q is gone. And yeah, there is something to be interpreted about sort of I guess sort of a father figure, but you can also sort of get that from him and M a little bit. And there's just less to it to really sink your teeth into. Yeah, I wish it had a little bit more of that kind of fun. I would have liked to be that. I wish they had gone back to the throwback of the Sean Connery, like, why are you always breaking my stuff, kind of a thing, which I really appreciated that. I wish there was more of that.
Yeah. Andrew?
Yeah. I recall, first seeing the film, and when the Q scene began, there was much laughter within the audience, and I always wondered whether that laughter was people going, "Oh, finally we can have some fun." But I mean, I think the main thing that stuck out for me in License to Kill was when he has his broomstick that has the little mic, and he relays the information to Pam, and then he just throws that gadget away. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. Again, just going back to the thing of Q saying, please do take care of my stuff. But yeah, as a father figure, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I certainly think that there's something in that. I certainly do think that there's something there, and I think that Q helps bring a certain warmth to the film. It is a much darker film, and so any little skerricks of warmth, I think, are much appreciated.
Yeah, and there were some particularly good gadgets in this. I mean, I like when you look at the Craig era, they kind of, for Skyfall, they kind of brought back the same idea with the signature gun that only Bond could fire, and that same gag plays out exactly in when he's doing the sniper scene in this, doesn't it?
Yeah.
On the building rooftop. So, and then of course we get the in License to Living Daylights, we get the key finder, don't we? The whistle key finder gadget, which is fun as well. A real throwback to that time.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, listen, a really good one to end on here. Tony has asked, would love to hear where you think Dalton rates in the 6 Bond actors. So what do you guys think about our Timothy there in the gun barrel?
Yeah, that's, I don't know about you, Josh. I find that a very, very tricky one. For me, Dalton rates highly, but I'm aware that he perhaps doesn't bring some essential component to the character. I mean, maybe it is that he's just far more like the Fleming blueprint in a way, but I think one essential element of the Bond filmic character is that Bond is comfortable within himself by and large, and I always think that Dalton's character didn't project that. But on the other hand, I think that's what made his characterization interesting. So it's this, but in terms of rating him, look, I would perhaps put him number 3.
Okay. I'm curious who 1 and 2 are then.
No, I was hoping you wouldn't ask that.
Oh no.
Look, I find it a very difficult question. Look, I feel as though Connery and Moore have to be up there just for the different sort of elements they brought to the character. So perhaps Connery, Moore, Dalton. But I feel as though I'm letting the other guys down. I'm sorry.
I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. What about you, Josh?
Well, I mean, I can't rate him above Connery. He's the original model. He's what set the mold. And I think he does a great Bond. I'm not putting him above that. I grew up on the Moore era. And there's something about those movies that I happen to love. I love the hokiness of those movies more so than the others. So I can't rate him above that. And I also really liked Roger Moore's portrayal of the character. I thought was great. So I can't put him above those two. I can put him above Lazenby because even though I love that movie, I don't love Lazenby in that movie. I don't think he was. I think if it were Connery playing that part, or even more playing that part, that would have been like the best Bond movie, hands down. So I will rate him above that. I will actually controversially maybe rate him above Daniel Craig because outside of Casino Royale, I don't love Daniel Craig as James Bond. I don't feel as if he fits the character to me. So I'll put him above that. So then it comes down to him and Pierce Brosnan. And I got to give it a little bit to Pierce because I think Pierce had that more playful edge. He did a lot of the same things that Dalton did, but also had that sort of like, I'm having fun with being a super spy thing that I think is a part of James Bond. And I would have liked to have seen that. So for me, it's fourth.
Okay. Interesting. I must admit, it's one that always stumps me because I like them all for different reasons. Obviously, as you've said, Connery was the original. He defined many things about the on-screen portrayal of the character. Some of those early films he was in were really great adaptations of the books as well, you know, and those stories. So he was important there. Lazenby, like you said, I didn't so much like his portrayal of Bond, but the film he's in is so important in the canon, if you like, of Bond. It's such an important story, and it's a great movie in its own right as far as that goes. I obviously grew up with Roger Moore. Roger Moore did the most consecutive official Bond movies than any of the others. So he did the most of them, I guess. Some could say maybe outstood his welcome a little bit, but you know,
including him, he would exactly. Also say
that. Pierce was a great all-rounder, as you rightly said. I mean, I think 3 out of his 4 films were good. We won't get all into that. That's another podcast.
Although I will stick up for Tomorrow Never Dies. I think I'm the only person.
I love Tomorrow Never Dies. That's actually my favorite one.
I love that movie.
Yeah, I love that movie too.
Invisible Car and all.
No. That's Die Another Day.
Die Another Day.
Sorry. Die Another Day. I will stick up for Die Another Day because I love that movie. Very much. I do. I love it.
No.
I'm sorry, but I actually like that one a great deal too. Even when it goes off the bend, I'm sorry.
It brought back all the stuff about James Bond that I love. You have a super villain with a crazy lair and a henchman with a weird affectation, and you've got like over the top. I don't know. It felt very Bond to me.
That might be
very hokey. It was
maybe
good
that's
fun.
A debate for another time. The Die Another Day debate. There you go. That could work. Put in the comments if you want us to do that, and we'll do it maybe. But yeah, obviously Craig is his own timeline, if you like, to quote you, Josh.
Yes,
so you know, but I love these 2 Timothy Dalton films, and I think as a pair of movies, they work well. May 570 saying, don't forget David Niven, but no, that film doesn't count. That's not canon.
But he is a pretty damn good Bond. I mean, he's very fun in that role.
It was one of the ones Fleming wanted, wasn't it? You know, up there with Cary Grant. But you know, that's a whole nother thing. Right, guys, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate we've gone over an hour and a half, so I know we need to wrap this up. But as I always do with all guests, I mean, we could talk about this for hours. I'm happy to have either of you back again to you know come on as guests if there's anything you ever want to talk about. But while you've got an audience, you know, where can people find more of your work or get in touch? I have put links in the show notes as well, but Andrew, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me at andrewmcness.com, where I have a range of film writings.
Fabulous. Okay. Anything else you want to plug? I know you've done some writings on some other very interesting movies, right?
yeah, 1 or 2. Look, this is probably shameless, but I'll bring these up. There's the Close Look at A View to a Kill.
Let me do that so we can see you better. There we go.
And then the other one, of course, now we're talking about classic films, and so everyone's going to know this one. But look, this is The Shark Is Always There,
Yes.
navigating the magnificent Jaws: The Revenge. Actually, perhaps
it's a great movie.
Isn't it? Isn't it great? Yes.
Josh is on a Jaws movie timeline that you need to check out. Definitely.
Yeah. I adore Jaws: The Revenge.
That's cool. I will put links to all of this stuff down in the show notes. So if you want to contact Andrew about his work, there will be links down there. Josh, what about you? Where can people find? I really encourage people that are movie fans, particularly if they're like me and obsessed with continuity and timelines and dates and ages and all of this sort of thing. Tell us about what you do there.
Yeah, well, I mean, right here on YouTube, it's Movie Timelines. It's a horror focused channel, but we don't just do horror. There's a lot of different topics. We do action movies, superheroes, comedies, sci-fi, the whole works. The video today was there's a video that went up just a little bit earlier today, which is Gremlins knockoff movies, which features me trapped in the body of a Gizmo doll. So I would recommend it for that. But yeah, I upload twice a week, every Monday and every Friday. Friday is always horror related. Monday is anything goes. So yeah, it's just a lot of fun. We do a bunch of different things, and I have quite a few guests on the channel. We've gotten some fun celebrities to pop in and out, and yeah, just talking movies.
No worries. Well, we got some nice comments there. Paul Julek says, "Thanks, guys. That was great." And Tony has put, "Thanks, Jen. Good debate until the die another day, love."
I will come back on and I will defend that movie. I'll point out why I love it.
Well, hey,
it's not good.
Please comment if you want to do that. If you want to find out more, obviously you're already on this channel, so please check out some of the previous live streams, some of the home media unboxings, reviews, explain videos, all of that sort of thing there. And if you want to see some of my creative work, I have another YouTube page which is called British Isles. That's EYLES, as in my last name, and there's some short films that I've made on that. But that just leaves me really to thank you all for watching this, and you guys that commented. I think I got to nearly everyone, so thank you for that. And obviously thank you to my excellent guests for being part of this. I really do appreciate you giving time from around the world to come and talk about my favorite topics. So thank you, guys.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Josh.
Oh, thank you. All right. Thanks, guys.
And we will see you on the next Home Media Minefield. Bye for now.